So delighted to have you on our Leaders Who Care series. Seema, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Mark.
Great way to to connect on a Saturday. Casual conversation about what's going on, so we're super happy to have you. And why don't we start with, if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll chat.
Sounds great. I'm Seema Kumar. I work for Johnson & Johnson. I'm head of communications, public affairs policy related to innovation and global health. And I have worked in multiple different healthcare and research institutions in the past, including Johns Hopkins, the National Institutes of Health, MIT at the Whitehead Institute, and finally here at a company where I've been now for more than 15 years.
Yeah, just some names of important places and companies, right? Nothing special.
Nothing special.
So can you?
Well, the reason I mention it is because over the course of my career, I have learned a lot about science, about public health, about the importance of engaging the public in science, all of which is sort of now coming into play as we deal with the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, it's the reason we're doing this series about recognizing leaders who care, because it's finally come to a point where actually caring does make a difference and is the right thing to do. And can you share with us, so a good segue, can you share with us, people talk about their why, but sometimes ask it a little bit different. Why do you do what you do?
I've always grown up with an interest in science. My father was a scientist, and I learned to love science and how science actually can make society progress. So I learned that big, important lesson from him. My mother, on the other hand, was a storyteller and a leader, and I loved the art of storytelling from her. And so as a hobby, I used to write and do writing and express myself that way. And it started to get published. And then down the road, I decided that science needs storytelling. And so throughout my entire career, I do this because I do believe that scientists have not engaged enough with the public, and the public has not engaged enough with the science. And of course, science impacts our daily lives in so many different ways. And so if you don't understand it, if you don't participate in the enterprise of science, then, as a citizen, you may not be putting your best foot forward for your own self, but also for society. And similarly, scientists cannot live in their ivory towers and just do all of their work behind, the doors of a laboratory. They need to step out and talk to the public and talk to them about what they actually do and why that work is important. And so I've always found myself advocating for science, but also advocating for the public and for the two twains to interact for the progress of society. And this has been something that I've done in all of those institutions that I've talked to you about.
Yeah, and that's why I get excited chatting with you, because it's been decades since corporate leaders have finally realized and recognized that aligning their brand, aligning their conversations with community, with social impact is actually good for business. And not to mention, it's great for attracting the best talent who only want now, and they'll ask the questions in interviews. Do you care about this? What are you doing with the environment? What do you think about health? To make a decision to come to that company as well. So it's finally got to that point, and you've been engaged in community and in getting trust and collaboration, advocacy for the biomedical industry, as you mentioned, in innovation and global health and well-being, in empowering women. We'll get into all of that. So I'm kind of revealing a little bit the answer to my question here, which is a push question, is, so what differentiates you, in your opinion, obviously, as one of the leaders who care?
I think that what differentiates me is something that I've learned from many leaders I have worked for, many great leaders I have worked for, and I continue to work for, and the great institutions that I've worked for. And that is that this is not something that is like a hood ornament that you put on top of a car just to show off. It has to be the engine that drives you. And so it is for governments, for corporations, for societies. That purpose actually comes first, impact comes first, and then you go back towards what it takes and what do we need to do, whether it's science, business, or whatever it is, to reach and to realize that impact and to realize that purpose. And at Johnson & Johnson, for example, we've had what we call the credo. You will hear every Johnson & Johnson employee talk about it. And it was written more than 75 years ago by General Johnson when the company decided to go public. And he wrote this, it's 4 paragraphs about our responsibilities to the healthcare workers, the doctors, the nurses, but also the mothers and fathers who use our products. Second come employees, and we must take care of our employees who work for us. The third comes the community, both the local community, but also the global community, and things like the environment. And then if we do all of this, then we will actually, have a fair return to our shareholders, and shareholders are owed a fair return. And so it talks about the stakeholders and what we need to do to achieve the purpose. And so right now I work with 2 great leaders who are working on the coronavirus vaccine. I shouldn't say 2 because it's a whole team working on a COVID vaccine for COVID, and sort of for us to just sort of jump and be first to the front lines is what we do. And similarly, during the Human Genome Project, I had an opportunity to work with Dr. Eric Lander at the Whitehead Institute at MIT. And there again, another great leader who sort of stepped up and made sure that we kind of did and got to the finish line, along with others like Francis Collins from the NIH. And of course, when I was at the NIH, I had the fortune of working in NIAID, that's the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which even in those days was headed by Dr. Tony Fauci and continues to be. And during those days, HIV was a big, was the pandemic or epidemic of the day in those days. So I've learned a lot that purpose and creating impact and making the world a better place comes first, and then everything else follows once you figure out how to get there is what business science is all about. But the destination and is what the purpose is, the impact is.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about being ahead of their time in knowing that that it's important. There's multiple stakeholders, involved, yes. And we all have grandparents that have influenced us. And my grandparents always used to say, with a little bit of a Kiev Ukraine accent, as long as you have your health, that's the most important thing, right?
Yes.
And it wasn't a line or a cliche. It was like real. And then education was number 2, etc. But you kind of segued into this with everything going on now. Technology is moving faster and faster every day. We have COVID, the pandemic. We thought we had enough to handle. Yep. Social justice was going to hit a tipping point sooner or later. The fact that it happened at the same time as this is amazing. Yep. Also. So with all that going on, we find that people have more time to think, or I'd call it an awakening a little bit as to what's important. So I'd love you to chat a little bit about how you view our awareness is going to be when we're at work or when we're at home or in our community, short-term, long-term.
Yeah, I think you had the right word. I think President Obama called it as well an awakening. And the awakening comes in so many different ways, personal, professional, societal. And I think that's what we're going through now. It's almost like a renaissance of the human to some degree. And to get there, we'll probably need to go through a lot of difficulties, but we'll get there. I'm confident of that. But I grew up in India, and in those days, it sort of was the same thing. I mean, because infectious diseases were all around you. During the monsoons, you couldn't step out of your apartment because there were floods all over, and you didn't want to get typhoid. So you were careful. Health came first, and as you said, education came next. And the education was, that's the way you lifted your lot up in life. When there are a billion people or so in a country, how do you kind of lift your lot up in life? It was through education, or that was sort of like the mantra we were all taught. The one thing I think that we maybe now have an awakening about is, we've always known health is important. We've kind of understood education is important. The other awakening we now have is that mental health is part of health as well. It's not just the body, but it's also the mind and the soul that we need to nourish and take care of. And there are many experts who think that the mental health is going to be the next pandemic. I mean, people are social beings, and so the social isolation is hard. On the flip side of it, sort of being all cooped up together in the house with your family who you love can sometimes get irritating as well.
Right.
And so that's a different type of stress. And then not being able to go out and eat, but on the other hand, being able to sort of rediscover cooking, all of that, I think, is what we're going through.
Yeah.
But I think the social justice piece of it is another layer. And I think that we have had another pandemic in our society for a very long time. And we've turned a blind eye to that pandemic.
Right.
Even though it has been the coronavirus we can't see. The pandemic of racism we can see right under our noses, and we've turned a blind eye to it. But I think no more, enough, right? And so I think we're awakening to that, and it's so much more apparent now. And I think what is clear is that we have to do something. And I even joked about it the other day, and I said, can we develop a vaccine for racism? And racism comes in all forms. And it's, even though it's something that is awakening in the United States, all across the world, that same awakening is happening. And racism has been around globally. So I think that it is upon us, and leaders who care will not just have a conversation about it, but do what they can to address it. And we can do things, small things, we can do big things. And I think that is, the time has come to take a stand and to do something about it, to act.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think I've always been of the mindset that things happen for a reason.
Yep.
And there is a reason this was the tipping point. People had maybe time to think about it. They took risks in going to protest when that could not have been maybe a good idea.
Yep.
So again, a good segue in. We're looking at business leaders who care, and I do think a lot of these things it's going to have to be solved by people, and people are in corporations doing great things. So how do business leaders who care, what role do you think business leaders who care should play to ensure that their employees, who are part of community, have financial wellness, physical wellness, and mental wellness? Because again, they're going to want that. And if that's taken care of, then basically, again, that will be good for business, and that will be good for community, because all the employees are part of community. And so I'd love your thoughts on how business leaders, what role they will play in that aspect.
Yeah, I think business leaders play a big role in being societal agents of change, partly from taking care of their own employees, making them feel good. And those employees, as you say, are parts of communities. And so I think that it has a snowballing effect. When you feel secure and taken care of, you actually then become an emotional leader in your community, because someone else has taken care of you, and then you sort of give that same sort of security to others who may not be secure. So I think that leadership engenders more leadership, and I think that that's what the business community can bring. And I think the business community, because of the way it's structured and it's the way it deals with accountability, the way it has to sort of be managed, lends itself really well to leadership at times like this. And that's why a lot of times when things have really seemed bad, people have turned to CEOs. So I think that when the war on cancer was declared in 1975, for a long time, not much was happening. And then the cancer CEO roundtable was, one of the first ones that was established. And you now see CEO roundtables established everywhere because as leaders of especially companies with employees whose lives you to some degree, you are impacting by your decisions, it's a level of accountability that I think is needed, and that's the leadership that we're seeing now across the world. And so I think the business community plays a key role. Now, obviously, no one sector can do it alone.
Yep.
The business community has to interact with governments and with NGOs, with civil society, to make sure that as an ecosystem, we set up this earth, this place for a better future, because all of us have children and we want to leave this place a better place than we found it when we entered this world.
It reminds me of that, that phrase work-life balance, which I never really got because it didn't seem to me that you did work and then you stopped work to have your life and then you stopped your life to go back to work. And I was talking, this is like end of last year, not to names around, but I was with Richard Branson and talking to him because we're doing about the future of work, we're working on stuff and that. And he said at the same time I said, do you remember when people used to say they were proud of where they worked? And you used to hear that as a kid all the time, when they're proud of where they work. Now, it was a different era, but still, a lot of people say they really like where they work, they like the people, but the word proud doesn't come up as much anymore. And you talked about well-being. We talked about also how the number one thing that's been proven that fills people's hearts and souls is belonging. Whether it's belonging to a community, and that community can be your company you work at, your home, your whatever, but it is belonging to have well-being. So it makes sense for corporate leaders to be involved in community because they're part of the community.
Absolutely, they do, and I think that at least pre-COVID, we spent more time at work than we did at home, just by the dint of how things work, right? Yeah. And so that was your family as well. And so Johnson & Johnson, we say Johnson & Johnson family of companies, a Johnson & Johnson family. So there is that ethos at our company where there is a feeling of belonging, and the word proud comes up often. So when we got the Ebola, when we sort of jumped into the front lines with the Ebola vaccine, when we jumped in front of the HIV crisis, when we've talked about curing cancer, eradicating TB from this earth, restoring the joy of movement for people with who need hip and knee replacement, and then just the well-being of consumer products that we've had. It's been sort of this sort of a blanket of love is how you feel when you think about J&J, because from the day you're born to the day you leave this earth, there Johnson & Johnson touches you in so many different ways. So the word family, the word proud comes up often, and I think that thank God for technology, because we continue to do that through these Zoom, and I mean, who knew Zoom had existed for a while.
It
And
has.
here we are using conference calls, right? And this
I
is a
know.
way to
It's,
stay
it's
connected.
quite, it is quite amazing. I want to, by the way, you are one of the, if not the, one of the healthiest companies in the world, right?
Correct. We are the healthiest company in the world, and in fact, now we're going through this challenge, which is, so we all form teams, and it's mildly competitive, where we log and we have our Fitbit, as you can see. We log our steps, we log our sleep, we log our what have you. Yes, and so there is a team of us, and then every day we're like, oh my God, got to go for a walk because I'm letting my team down, and I got to go get my steps in. But yes, being healthy has been a key part, again, as the largest healthcare company in the world.
Right.
We want to walk the talk, and that goes for mental health as well, because we want to be sure that emotionally, mentally, that we have the space to feel cared for. And so that's why mental health is a big focus also for us. So social justice, mental health, physical health, you know,
They all come together. They all come together.
all of it. It's all yeah, all together.
So Seema, I'm excited to learn about this new program you have at J&J about the vaccine. Can you share a little bit about it?
Absolutely, Mark. So, as you know, Johnson & Johnson and many other companies, of course, were working on a vaccine for the coronavirus, and we've been doing this since January, when the sequence first became available of the coronavirus. And so the moment we started working on a vaccine and we began to actually, start to announce some of the progress we were making, and we used to do a lot of media interviews, it became very apparent that the public at large and many people did not still know enough about the science of public health, the science of vaccines, the science of immunity and immunology. And so it became clear that there is a thirst for knowledge, and that the engagement between scientists and the public hadn't really happened enough for people to understand and ask questions of real scientists, their top questions. So we launched a show, which is a live show on LinkedIn Live, but it's also played on the J&J YouTube channel, the J&J LinkedIn Live channel, and J&J Facebook channel, called Road to a Vaccine. It's hosted by Lisa Ling, and each week we bring in guests from all over the world, who are experts in public health, who are scientists, who are also people who understand vaccines and have actually worked on other public health emergencies, along with some of our own scientists who do the educational segment called Vaccines 101. So it's an educational show.
Mm-hmm.
It even goes into basics like, how do you design a vaccine? You don't know. I mean, we haven't had vaccines be sort of the big thing in our life for such a long time. How do viruses spread? Why is this virus spreading like this? What can you be doing? And so on. So we talk about all of these, and the disparities, the healthcare disparities that COVID has actually, brought to light. And so each week we talk about this. The response has just been extraordinary. We've got 1 million viewers who tune in, ask questions from all over the world. And so it's become a huge success. And success is not about how many viewership, but the level of engagement that we have, both from the scientific community, the public health community, and just people around the world.
Yeah, that's spectacular. I think you had mentioned it before. People just feel better if they know what's going on, and they learn,
Yes.
and they belong with the solution, if you will.
Absolutely.
And then energy seems to happen from there to get things done faster.
Very true. Knowledge is really an important piece of the puzzle, and so knowing is the first step, and understanding and being able to ask questions is important.
Tell us a little bit about empowering women from India. A little bit about Seema.com. Who was it named after?
Well, you know, I have always believed in empowering women. And I think that I talked to you that early in my life when I was, you know, studying to be a physicist, like my father, I was also writing as a hobby. And the writings were all about the social status of women and women in India in those days. And I think the social status of women is still far from being optimal. I think we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. So empowering women has always been something that I have believed in. And I've done it as part of my job. It's not my main job per se, but just, you know, it's something that, you know, is, I think, part of my DNA. And then it occurred to me, you know, a couple of years ago, last year, that one of the key things that that as part of my giving back to my community and looking through some really old files in the basement of something that I had dreamt up when I was a student was how to empower women of, you know, South Asian origin, Indian origin. And so really what we're trying to do is to create a network, a community of women of South Asian origin to come together, to shine a light on each other, because representation of women of South Asian origin is not, you know, is not enough. We need more, number one. Number two, you know, breaking the stereotypes, because even like in many other countries, even in the even though, you know, Indian people, the diaspora, are you know, all over. You see them in places of leadership. There are many women who are in places of leadership, and yet they don't get their share of limelight. Right. And so that's why you know, this has become another important piece to showcase the contributions of women of South Asian origin, but not only the contributions, it's more than that. It's like, what can we as a community together do for the next generation? Because there is this thing called code switching that we all do as women of South Asian origin, because we sort of live this life of duality. So we leave our culture over here and then come as somebody who fits in, but then go back to, you know, so our cultural life is over here and our professional life is over there. So we live this life of duality. And, you know, how do we sort of bring our full selves and how to create that community that will have some sort of collective vision to do something for girls in the future. So that's the goal. And, you know, there's an awakening there as well, because, you know, pre-COVID and what have you, you know, our goal was to sort of get to the top, quote unquote, whatever the top is for different people. And we kind of didn't, you know, it was more about sort of material things that you wanted to acquire, or the brand products that you brought, or the, you know, it was all sort of external material. But I think that what COVID has also taught us is that actually none of that matters. I mean, you know, I'm not wearing my high-heeled Jimmy Choos or Louboutins today. I'm wearing flip-flops, but you can't see.
Don't mind, you can't see.
Yeah, and my feet are happier for it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
well, you know, something you said that really hits, because we do a lot of work with women, and we actually launched our company with the Decade of Women initiative, and is that the more young women see women like you doing that, the more they feel they can do that as well.
Yep.
So it's a real important role. You're basically influencers of creating the space and creating a role model for them to do it.
Yeah, and and women scientists, and women doctors, women's sort of haven't had enough of a platform. I think, and now I think it's getting much better. I think we still don't have equal pay, equal contributions. I think it's, and here I'm not just talking about the corporate lives or the, Western multinational life, even though there too we see that, in companies, all companies are striving to get to that sort of, gender parity, so the intent is definitely there. I'm talking about laborers in the farms in Pakistan, or the young girls in Africa, or the young girls in the slums of India, where what do they aspire to be? What do they want to do? And many of them, including the laborers in construction, for example, or the migrant workers in India, women, they do a lot of work. And so if you could put a value on some of the unpaid work that goes on across the world, then, that's a lot of opportunity cost. That's a lot of value in, GDP that is lost by the world.
It's a great point that you raise, and it deserves a whole other conversation, but we're working a lot with bringing dignity and recognition to laborers, to other people that are really essential workers, which we've learned that term more now about essential workers, and not, as they would call it a lot of times, unskilled labor. It shouldn't be called unskilled labor.
Right.
They're important. They got value, like you said, et cetera, et cetera. So it's another awakening, actually, I think, that's really important here. That's a good opportunity. So Mother Nature, or the spirits, or all of them, decided this is a good time to smack us in the head and think about what's important. And so I think what you're doing at Seema.com is fantastic as well. And I super appreciate you sharing some of this on the Leaders of Care series.
Thank you very much, Mark. And it was a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
We'll talk again soon.
Talk soon.